we need to get moving on this because I think we're going to have a pretty big agenda with the budget. So I'm going to introduce Chris Myers. He is our clerk, city clerk, and he oversees the elections. He's going to go through a PowerPoint, and then we'll take any comments and questions afterwards. So, Chris, take it away.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Good evening. As the Councilwoman said, I'm going to go through a presentation that kind of outlines the options that the Council is looking at as far as possible consolidation of elections and try to explain it, and then we'll answer questions about it. So, first of all, the City Council is considering the consolidation, which means moving the city elections, which are currently held in the fall of even-numbered years, or odd-numbered years, I'm sorry, and moving them to the fall of even-numbered years so that the city items would be on the ballot during the state primary and general elections when we vote for governor and president and all of the other things that are on those ballots. And the primary reason that they're looking at doing this is because voters, for whatever reasons and a variety of reasons, tend to have habits of not participating in local elections. And the participation rate is higher at the state primary and general elections. So moving, as we'll go over some charts that show the turnout differences, moving the elections could cause more participation, and that is the thinking behind the consideration of consolidating it. A little bit of background first on city elections, just so you kind of have a picture of what we've done and how long we've been doing it and so on. City of Phoenix is the second largest election jurisdiction in the state of Arizona. Obviously, Maricopa County is the largest. We are second. Phoenix is larger than Pima County or any of the other counties. And we do conduct our own elections. We do all of it ourselves, except that we use the voter registration rolls from the county recorder because they're statutorily responsible for voter registration. So we get the rolls from them, and then we conduct the election. The city has been conducting the elections because ours are nonpartisan. We've conducted them separately from the state, as far as we can tell, all the way back to incorporation in 1881. In 1949, the city changed from the spring, which is when initially all cities and towns had their elections in the spring. In 1949, we moved to the fall of the off year. So not with the partisan state elections, but nonpartisan in the fall of even years. Phoenix has 713,000 registered voters, and again, that's the second largest in the state. 70% of those voters are on the permanent early voting list. So they're on the list that they automatically get mailed a ballot by the recorder for the elections that they're eligible to vote in. There's an issue with that related to consolidation that we'll talk more about, related to independence, but in general, that's what the people list is. And in city elections, 95% or more of the ballots cast, the people who actually vote in the election, do so by mail. 95% or more of the ballots that we count in the election have been voted by mail. The city's also been a leader in elections and innovations in the state throughout its years. The city was one of the first to consolidate precincts back in 1987, and then we implemented the first permanent early voting list in 1997. The state didn't have that until 2007. And then all the people on the Phoenix list were actually automatically placed on to the county list when they started it. And then we were also the first to develop and use voting centers. We did that in 2011. There's now 2 or 3 other counties that are using voting centers, and Maricopa County is looking at trying to do that as well. So there are 3 options, basically, that the council is looking at, and I'm going to go through all 3 of those. But right up front, I want to say all 3 options have some pros and some cons. So it depends on your perspective and which pros and which cons you like or dislike as to which one you might favor. But that's what we're here for, find out what your thoughts are and to give the council some indication of what the public wants to see. So the first option would be to maintain the current August-November election cycle in the odd number of years. The Phoenix would continue to conduct those elections ourselves, and one of the advantages of that is it would keep the nonpartisan city elections separate from the partisan elections in the fall of the even-numbered years. One other advantage of that being separate would be that voters and the media would have a chance to focus on local issues, just Phoenix issues. The Phoenix issues don't get mixed in with the state candidates and the federal candidates and all of the other ballot measures that are on the state. I'm sorry, the second option is the August-November consolidated cycle in even years. So this would be the option of moving our elections and putting our items on the ballot at the state primary and general election in the fall of even-numbered years. There, again, the advantage to that over the city election, because people tend to not vote in local elections, so the turnout in the city elections tends to be lower. Moving them to the fall of even years, at least for the general election, the turnout has been higher, as the statistics show. But there's a problem with this model. In a sense, there's a challenge, at least, in that the independent voters do not automatically receive a ballot if they're on the permanent early voting list. And that's because they're not registered as part of a party. The purpose of that August fall election is for the parties, really, to select the candidate that's going to run in the general election. And so it's intended to be a partisan primary election for the parties. So the people that are registered as independents are not registered as part of a party, and yet there's an open primary law here where they can choose to vote in a partisan primary election if they choose to. So the county can't mail them a ballot because the county doesn't know which ballot to mail them. Do they want the Republican ballot, the Democratic ballot, the Libertarian ballot, or do they want just the nonpartisan issues on their ballot? So the people voters have to request that from the county in order to get a ballot, whereas other voters that are registered in a party just automatically would get the ballot. So we'll talk some more about that, but just to introduce that issue. The third option is a November-March consolidated cycle. So our first election, instead of being in August because of the independent problem and turnout, which we'll look at in a minute, being in August, it would move to November. So we'd have our first election in November when the turnout is the highest, and then if we had to have a runoff, it would move to the spring, which is the next day under state law that we're allowed to have an election. And there are a couple of challenges related to that we'll talk about more in a minute. Consolidation does require voters to approve some charter amendments. The charter specifies when our elections are held, so we would have to have the voters approve a charter amendment to move those dates. And the council is considering referring those ballots to those items to the ballot this fall, so that if they got approved by the voters, we could consolidate what would be our regular 2019 election for mayor and council members could then move to 2020 and be consolidated with the state election for governor in 2020. Okay, now we're going to go through the three proposals and kind of what they look like. What are some of the differences? I'm going to go through quickly just as a comparison, and then we'll kind of go back through some of the pros and cons and specifics on each one. So the first one would be to just keep things the way they are. We can continue to conduct the elections in the fall, in August and November of odd years. For city elections, we do use the permanent early voting list, and we mail ballots to all of the voters, including the independents. Because it's a nonpartisan election, everybody gets the same ballot. There's no picking of a party or which ballot that you want to vote. So everybody gets it for that. We also use voting centers instead of polling places. We implemented that, as I mentioned, in 2011. Any voter can go to any of the voting locations to vote. You don't have to go to the one by home. You can go to one by work or the gym or school or wherever happens to be convenient for you. And you can also vote on Saturday, Monday, or Tuesday. You're not limited to just one place on election day. And for the city elections, we have a general and runoff type of cycle. Whereas the county has a primary and general, ours is general and runoff. So our first election is the general election. That's when the propositions go on the ballot, and that's when most of our candidates actually get elected. And then if we need a runoff election, that's then held in November. So we don't have elections in November all the time. One of the advantages of this system is that you don't have to have two elections every time. And actually in Phoenix, 70% of the candidate races, which amounts to 60% of the elections, we don't need a runoff. So we only have a runoff election 40% of the time, and when we do, it's usually only one or maybe two council districts. It's not a citywide election. So we're not conducting two elections. And then I'm going to talk about cost to give you a cost comparison, but I want to clarify, this is the cost on average for a citywide election. Obviously, if we're only doing one district or two districts or part of the city, the cost is less. But all of the cost comparisons I'm going to give you are for a citywide election. So for the city to conduct our current voting center election, which includes the mailing of ballots to the permanent early voting list, is about $1 million. Most of that is printing and mailing costs for the ballots. Second option is the August-November consolidation for the county primary and general. Under this option, the county would conduct the election. The city offices and what we have on the ballot would just be printed on the county's primary ballot. The county does use the permanent early voting list for early voters, but because of the August primary being a partisan election, we have that issue where the independents have to request a ballot. And the way that works is, if you're on the permanent early voting list, you know you get a postcard about 90 to 120 days before the election that says there's going to be an election. It gives you a chance to update your information or give us an alternate address. If you're going to be away for the summer or away when the ballots get mailed, you can give us an address to mail the ballot to you. So everybody gets that postcard. But for a primary election, the independents get a little bit different postcard. It tells them you're registered as an independent, so you need to tell us which ballot you want us to mail to you. And it gives you the option to pick the Republican ballot or the Democratic ballot or the Libertarian ballot or any other recognized party for that election. And then it also gives you an option to select a nonpartisan or city ballot. So you can get the items that just have the nonpartisan without any of the party offices on it, or you can get a ballot for one of the party, which will also have the city things on it. So I hope that's clear. So you can get everything, or you can get just the nonpartisan races on it. But the independent voters for the August election are required to notify the county what ballot they want to receive in order to get the ballot, whereas others just automatically get it because they know what ballot to send them. We consolidate an election for the county conducted when it's on the state primary or general election dates. The cost is only about $500,000. And it's because the state and the county and all the other jurisdictions share the cost for that election, so Phoenix is only paying a portion of it rather than conducting it ourselves. So that's an advantage of the consolidation, is for that election or those dates, there is a savings. The third option that they're looking at is a election in November when the turnout is highest, and then a runoff in March of even, and then the runoff would be in odd years. Again, the county would conduct the election in the fall in November because it's on their ballot when they're doing the state general election. But if there was a runoff, the proposal right now is that the city would do that because we can do it at a lower cost than what the county would do. Again, the permanent early voting list is used by the county, but now because this is the general election, it's not a partisan primary, everybody gets the ballot again because everybody gets the same general election ballot. You don't have the issue of only getting a Republican or a Democrat or a Libertarian ballot, for example. And again, November elections, we'll see in a minute, the turnout in the November elections is higher. The county uses polling places for those elections, as you know, so you're required, each voter is required to go to one specific place that the county has designated for that precinct. And the polling places are only open on Tuesday. So you'd be limited to one place on Tuesday, just as you are now for the general election. It's not any different. For the March and runoff in the odd year, then the following, we would do a voting center election, and you'd be able to go to any places again in March. So the cost issue here for the county, if we were on the November ballot, the first election would cost about $500,000. That's their standard cost. And then when the city conducts it, if it's a citywide election, it would cost us $1 million to do that election. However, if we paid the county to do that election, it would cost $2 million, which is why we're considering having the city conduct the March election rather than give it to the county to do, because it would cost us twice as much. And we would wipe out the savings that we achieved from the first election in November. Okay, on the city one, as I mentioned, it would keep the nonpartisan city races separate, and the voters and the media could focus on the local issues. So theoretically, there would be more information out there. We talked about the people issue for the August and November elections. For the city, that's not an issue. We mail the ballots to everyone. And there are 500,000 voters in Phoenix on the permanent early voting list. And only about a third of those, though, actually return the ballots that they're mailed for a city election. So we mail over 400,000 ballots, and we only get a little over 100,000 or so of those back. We use voting centers, as we talked about. In the August general, since we don't have to have primaries, or don't have to have a runoff very often in November, things get decided in the first one, we avoid the cost of a second election. One final advantage of the current system is that there is plenty of space on the ballot to put a lot of propositions if we have them, and more information describing the proposition. You may recognize from city ballots, there's a longer description of what's on the ballot, on that ballot, than there is on the state elections, because there's so many things on it, there's just less space. Okay, the middle option for the August-November, the main issue there we've already talked about is the independents, and them having to request to get the ballot for the August-November, or for the August, not in November. Everybody gets it in November. I mean, the purpose, as I mentioned, of the primary election in August is for the parties to select a candidate to run in the general election. So the idea and the purpose of those elections is partisan. So it creates an issue when you put nonpartisan races on that ballot. And again, these are the elections with president, governor, state legislature, state propositions, Congress. All of those are on the primary and general election. One comment on the August-November as far as the ballot space. There is more room on the primary ballot in August with the state than there is in the general. So although there's not as much room as the city, we have more room on our ballot because all we've got is mayor and council and nothing else. There is a little bit more room for propositions on the August ballot. So the county figures they could usually do between 4 and 6 propositions on that ballot. Whereas for the city, we can do 6 to 12. We've had as many as 13 on the ballot at one time before. We do have an option to pay more money to get more space, but then that increases the cost. So it's there if we need it, and we could probably put another 6 or so propositions on. To illustrate the independent issue, here's some data from the last 2 county primary elections in August of 2016 and August of 2014. They sent notices to about 400,000 registered voters on the permanent early voting list. And again, that notice would have told them there's going to be an election and that you're an independent for the independents, and so therefore you would need to, check the box below and send it back to tell us whether you want a Republican ballot, Democratic ballot, Libertarian, or the city nonpartisan ballot. You see there in the column on the right, only 15% of the independent voters sent that postcard back and actually got a ballot in the 2016 election, and 19% did that in the August 2014 election. So a lot of the independents are not participating in the primary elections. We looked at the same figures for city. Now, because we mailed everybody, we have 148,000 independents on the permanently voting list. All 148,000 got the ballot. They didn't have to select anything. But of that and so they all got it. But of that 148,000, only about 20 to 25% actually voted or returned the ballot. So again, in the August elections and in local elections, independents don't seem to be participating at a high rate. And I'm sure there's a variety of reasons for that. Looking at the turnout between the elections, and one of the reasons here for looking at both of these other options with the county, here's a chart showing the turnout by Phoenix voters in the Phoenix election in the orange, and then in the following county election in August. And these are just Phoenix voters. This isn't how many people voted, in the county or the turnout for the entire election. This is the percentage of Phoenix registered voters that actually participated. And you'll see that there's no difference in 2013 and only about 2 or 3% difference in the other years. So the turnout in the county primaries is really not any higher or very little higher than the city elections at the same time. But as you see, since there wasn't much difference in turnout here, that's what led the council to considering the November option, which is what, well, let me talk about it first. Here's the items on the November election, and we'll get to the chart in a second. Again, the county would conduct it using polling places, using polling places in November, but they would mail ballots to everyone again in the Peeble. That Peeble issue only exists in the August primary election, because every other time everybody gets the same ballots. And the November elections, as we'll see in a second, have the highest turnout levels, and we'll see that in a minute. They would use polling places for that election. One of the challenges or the concerns that some people have about the November option is that the ballot is a long ballot. It's the one with all the judges and all the things that you recognize. So there isn't very much room for city measures, and there's very little room for city text. The county estimates that they could put 2 to 4 city measures on the ballot that time that would fit, but the amount of text that would be actually on the ballot is just a description, do you want to vote yes or no to do this? It's about 50 words, and that's it. So you have to rely on the publicity pamphlet to get the information about the proposition. And then the other challenge with this option is that the runoff election is not until March. So you would have a campaign cycle for this election that ran from leading up to the November election for the first one, and then continuing on for the runoff until the following March. So 5 months after the first election before we would have the second election. And then there's also some concern about what would happen to the turnout in March. The elections in the spring have even lower turnout generally than the elections in the fall of odd years, so we might get a real high turnout in the November election, presumably, but what would happen in the March election and how many people would vote in that is an unknown and no real way to know. And again, the county election in November would be $500,000. The city cost would be $1 million, as compared to having the county do it would be $2 million. Here's the chart on the turnout and the difference in the November elections, and this is where the big differences are and the push for the consolidation. You'll see the city mayor election and districts in 2011, 28.69%, and that was a highly contested mayor's race. The following year, when we had the presidential election, I believe this was President Obama's second election, the turnout, Phoenix voters, was 74%, so 40-some% difference of people that participated. The following, in 2013, we had a 23% turnout in just the 4 district races. There was no mayor option on the ballot and no props, so it was only in the 4 even districts. The governor's election then the following year was 43%. So you see there's even a large drop in turnout, typically between the governor's race and the presidential race. 30% in this one. Then you see the next column, it says no city runoff. In 2015, all of the city candidates got elected in August. Somebody got a majority of the vote, and so there was no runoff election, so we had no runoff election. We saved the money for that election, and everybody was already done and elected. And then again, a presidential election this last time, almost 71% of Phoenix voters participated in that election. There are several charter amendments that would be required to implement this, changing the date of the election and so on. And so, as I mentioned, the council's considering referring those to the ballot in 2018, so they would be on the county ballot this fall, either in August or November, so that if they were passed by the voters, we could then begin our campaign cycle, wait until 2020, because we have our regular scheduled election in August of 2019. We would have to start the campaigning and petition process and all that early in 2019. So we need to know going into 2019 whether we're consolidating or whether we're going to conduct our elections in 2019 separately. Okay? That's all the information that we had to present. So I think Councilwoman Stark will come up and call the cards. If you want to speak or make comments, if you can fill out cards and bring them up, and then we'll call them and try to answer your questions. Thank you all very much for being here and providing input for the council and for us to proceed.
Thank you, Chris. And we need you to come up here because we are televising this for all the other council members to see. So the first speaker is Kevin Lorea. Did I say that right? Ah. I can't even pronounce my son's name. Thank you, Kevin.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the information. City of Phoenix, thank you for that presentation. My name is Kevin Loera. I represent Living United for Change in Arizona. We advocate for immigrant rights, worker rights, basically any rights to preserve our democracy, especially in today's now and age. But to keep it short, the reason I'm here is because this is actually personal to me. 2 years ago, and this is actually perfect timing, I learned a very hard lesson in March of 2016, and that lesson was that we should never, ever, ever use the justification or the reason of cutting costs to consolidate elections. It is our taxpayer money, and quite frankly, I think we should be doing the opposite of consolidating elections. I truthfully think that we should be doing the opposite. We should be expanding elections, which means that I oppose any changes to the City of Phoenix charter. One of the main reasons I oppose that change is because I was actually assaulted by Capitol Police during the March primary fiasco, debacle, whatever word you remember it by, 2 years ago, for protesting and advocating and standing up to voter rights and voter protections and speaking out against voter suppression. In my eyes, in my honest view, this is no more than another way to suppress the vote. Sure, the numbers look nice and the presentation looks nice, but the reality is that we're battling voter suppression all across this country, especially in a state here like Arizona that is controlled, all three branches of government, by the GOP. So I do have a couple points to make, and I'll keep it short, so please listen. Again, cutting costs / saving money, those terms, those justifications should never be a reason to actually consolidate elections. We should be expanding it. Second point, city and other local elections need their own time, their own election cycle, and their own attention, so the voters actually have time to do the research and actually learn about the candidates. We cannot let this happen because our local elections are going to get swept up under all the negative dark ads and all the attention that the media gives on the state and national elections in August and the general. Another quick point I want to make, what consolidation elections really means is consolidating power to hold these elections. It means making our elections more hidden, less transparent, more controllable by the establishment, and more susceptible to the unlimited amounts of dark money and ads that influence the state and national presidential elections. Another point, this may, and I'm not sure, extend the term of sitting council members unjustly because the next election would be in 2019. Another point, elections in a sustainable democracy deserve their own time and attention, especially a city the size of Phoenix. We need to stand up to the GOP and the Trump agenda. This is how it actually leaks into our local government, because all the time we're talking about city elections and the city of Phoenix, there's actually a bill introduced into our legislature currently by Speaker of the House, J.D. Mesnard. That House bill is HB 2604, and what they're seeking to do is to give the controlling party of our state government, the Republican Party, they want to give them control so they can decide when we actually have our local elections. So quite frankly, I'm a little startled and concerned that the City of Phoenix council members, 6, voted into looking further into this when it should be a no-brainer. We should be expanding elections and focusing on those in the currently upheld even years rather than getting them tied up and mixed up with the statewide elections. Furthermore, and quite importantly enough, any changes or amendments made to the City of Phoenix's charter or law would disproportionately affect Latino and independent voters. We can't let this happen. This would not actually boost turnout. If you want to boost voter turnout, then you need to have exciting candidates with strong messages that actually get people out there to vote, not just put them on a ballot where state candidates are getting the attention. Yes, so with that being said, I urge the City of Phoenix and the council members to strongly reconsider this. Please sway away from Speaker of the House J.D. Mesnard's proposal to give more power to the state legislature. We should be doing the opposite. We should be expanding elections and inviting more people into the political process, not bunching them in with state and general elections. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. But for the record, that consolidated election was the county, was not the city, the one in March 6, 2016. But thank you so much for your comments. Next speaker
Yes.
is, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't want us to be at fault. That was the county under another county recorder. So the next speaker is Gabrielle. Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay, thank you. I just didn't want us to be at fault. Gabrielle Maitorino, right? Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Gabe.
Hi, okay. This is my first time speaking on a microphone this close, sorry. And I'll be honest, this is my first community meeting. To give you a little background of myself, I am Gabriel Maitarena. I work for the Youth Leadership Council for Mercy Maricopa Integrated Care. That is the REBA for the Maricopa County. So I deal with a lot of behavioral health and representing young adults in our community and always making sure they have the resources and also the skills available to navigate the behavioral health system. And again, this is one of the best ways to get in touch with the community, is always, like, come out to these community meetings. And I just barely am getting in tune with the elections and consolidating. I'll be honest, I kind of researched it a little bit before I got here. And in all honesty, like my fellow speaker just right now said, and explained, it's definitely in the belief that we want to make sure we have strong personnel and incorporated into our elections. So I definitely believe, we have to have strong candidates to represent us in every sense. That's what I try to do with our fellow youth leaders in our behavioral health field. And I know my man, Danny Valenzuela, over there. We met at a meeting with the Senator Robert Mesa, so I'll give a shout out to my man over there. I saw him wearing the burgundy shirt. I was like, he's rocking it. Yeah, just kidding. But again, like, I just want to make sure everybody's out here, with that. Everybody can join in the election, and definitely we don't want to consolidate if it means, we're losing possibilities of increasing, better representation in our leaders. But then again, if we add in some more statistics as far as, what is the age range of people that are voting within our county or our states, it can definitely improve as to see is where we can better make improvements in a sense, like, whether we consolidate it or we, in a sense, do the opposite of which we are trying to do. So thank you again. Like I said, I want to keep it brief short because this is my first time and I'm learning from everybody. Thank you.
You have a future in politics. Congratulations.
I give credit to my man, Danny.
And we'll probably work on some of those additional stats as we go through this process. And I think that's all the speakers we have. So thank you so much for coming, and hopefully you'll stick around for the budget. Thanks.